Thank you, Steve. Good morning and welcome you all to the final day of imaginAviation. Thank you very much on that Orville update, and we hope he's found really soon. But before we kick off the day with our keynote speaker, I would like to note that we are again having our graphic artist, Joe Byrne, on board capturing our inspiring story of thought leadership throughout the day. We'll also be posting survey links throughout the day on the live stream and YouTube chat, so if you want to check those out, those will be on the right-hand side of your screen. Please tell us what you think about imaginAviation. We're always trying to make it better. If you missed the link, no need to worry. We'll send everyone who's registered an email Friday morning. Also, I'd like to remind everyone that we will continue to use the Conference IO tool, which can be scanned here or that can be found in the YouTube chat right after the video feed. We encourage you all to talk to one another and ask questions throughout the day, and we will do our best to get them all answered. We are very excited to bring you a full day of thought leadership in action. I would like to start the day with introducing to you Dr. Maxwell Briggs, the Chief Technologist of NASA Glenn Research Center, to talk about making sure great ideas don't just stay ideas. Welcome to imaginAviation, Max.
Thank you, Angela. As Angela said, my name is Max Briggs. I'm the Chief Technologist at the NASA Glenn Research Center, where I'm in charge of trying to make sure that the NASA Glenn Research Center gets the most out of their early stage innovation investments. Prior to being the chief technologist, I worked as a nuclear power systems engineer and as a portfolio manager for various segments of the SBIR program, including the Aeronautics Research Mission Directorate, as well as SBIR Ignite. And throughout all of those roles, I was either pitching ideas, developing technology, or listening to technology development ideas and pitches. And essentially, what keeps me up at night and what drives me is trying to answer a fundamental question: why do so few ideas make it? And perhaps the corollary: what can I do to help? How can I make more efficient use of precious resources? And innovation and time, and innovator time, is perhaps the most precious resource. And I don't want to start off overly negative because, at the end of the day, the United States has an innovation ecosystem that is second to none, and it's the envy of the world. But I'm greedy. It's not good enough to be the best. We have to be even better. We have to continue to improve what we get out of these scarce resources. So the focus of my talk today is going to be on things that I've seen in my time that I think we can do in order to improve our rate of transitioning an idea from an idea to a prototype, or a prototype to a capability. And so I'm going to roughly bend these things into things that you guys can control, innovative thinkers, things people like me can control, people that are trying to prioritize the resources, the scarce resources that we put into innovations, and then things that are outside of our control, largely outside of our control. And they all matter. They're all part of the mix that determines whether an innovation is going to succeed or not. So I'm going to start off by just mentioning some of the things that are outside of our control, right? So there are times where somebody has an idea and somebody delivers on everything they can do, and the idea is still not going to go forward. And it's unfortunate. But for example, in the private sector, that might look like kind of the investment environment, the market, the macroeconomics, things like interest rates. It can all affect the amount of available capital to fund an early stage innovation. So in certain environments, early stage innovation funds might be able to fund the top 1,000 investments, or top 1,000 ideas. And for reasons that are completely out of your control, in another environment, perhaps only the top 10 make the list and make the cut. And if you're innovation number 11, that's very difficult, right? But that's largely out of your control. And so we need a little luck to get past things like that. That luck is going to be part of the early stage innovation framework, no matter what. On the government side, it maybe looks a little different, but the problem is the same. It's a problem with scarcity of resources. And so sometimes we can invest in an early stage technology, and then because either budgets are changed, reduced, or reprioritized, sometimes an innovator can deliver on everything they need to do, and the landing spot for a technology is just no longer there. And that is unfortunate. It requires luck to get over that hump. But the solutions to that are above my pay grade, and they're something that we're probably going to not be able to influence ourselves. And that's okay. We just need to understand that there are things that are outside of our control in early stage innovations, and not take it personally when they happen to put up a barrier. Now, there are some things that I think are inside of an innovator's control. I'm sorry. One other thing I wanted to mention that I do think is something that is outside of our control is whether or not the innovation works. That is a scenario where if we're appropriately taking risk in an early stage innovation portfolio, several ideas are going to look good on paper and then not pan out in reality. And I just want to destigmatize that. Like, negative results provide us useful information, and that's okay. And many times that's not the fault of the innovator or the innovative thinker. We want you guys to be proposing things that are hard. And if you're proposing hard things, you're going to run into insurmountable obstacles at certain points. It's not always easy to determine what's an insurmountable obstacle versus a tough technical challenge. That's part of the job. But I will say that it is important that when we find out that a technology is facing an insurmountable obstacle, we can't control necessarily. We don't know ahead of time if that's the technology that's going to face an insurmountable obstacle. But once we know, I do think it's important that we reallocate the resource, right? Both the money and the innovator's time. The example I use is, if Leonardo da Vinci would have spent his entire life working on the helicopter that he drew in his notebook, we wouldn't know his name. We have to be able to move on from a good idea or an idea that's that whose time hasn't come, and be able to reallocate that resource to something that has the potential for the here and now. Moving on to some things that I do think are within the control of the innovator is customer discovery. I think it's very, very common that somebody designs a widget and it advances the state of the art, and that's great. Advancing the state of the art is a necessary condition, but it's necessary but not sufficient for having an innovation funded and being worthy of progressing. So you may find that, especially in early stage innovations, that there may be 100 potential use cases for your innovation, but you really have to do the homework and actually talk to those people, those 100 people, because in all likelihood, of those 100 potential use cases, only maybe 10 of them are actually going to be people that would be willing to onboard this technology. And of those 10, it's probably likely that there's only a few that are impacted by that technology enough to consider investing in that technology. And of those, there might only be one or two that actually have a plausible funding path that's on a timeline that works. And so it's important that we don't just assume that because we advance state of the art that we're valuable. We actually need to go out and discover those customers and figure out how we are valuable. And that's how you're going to start to build advocacy. Another one, perhaps the biggest one that I see, is we have to lead with why. It's completely natural for people who are working in a lab or working on an innovation to want to tell someone exactly what they did and how it advances state of the art. And that's important. And there's a time for that. That does have to be communicated. But typically, it's not what has to be communicated in the first meeting with a potential customer or a first meeting with a funding source. I'll just use an example. If you have a 99% efficient compressor design and it advances the state of the art from one that is 98% efficient, that might be a big deal. It might not be. I don't know. It depends on what it does for my system. If it saves a consumer $1 per year of electricity when it's put into a refrigerator, it may not be worth the investment from the refrigerator company, right? It might not be there. But if it saves me $100 million a year in fuel costs for an aviation application, perhaps it is worth a decades-long, multi-million-dollar technology development effort. And so if you just articulate the 99% versus 98%, it does not tell the customer why they should care. And so leading with why is something that's in your control as an innovator. And it's difficult because leading with why requires that you understand the customer needs. And there's a lot of potential customers. So you have to do that customer discovery to figure out where you fit, and you have to start talking their language. You have to tell them why it matters. Another one is being open to pivots. So during this customer discovery process, it's not guaranteed that you could go from 100 potentials to 0 potentials. Nobody might be able to fund that initial innovation. But during that process, you're hearing people say, well, your innovation in its current state does not help me, but there are some things that would help me, right? And while you're acquiring that information and that list of problems that need to be solved by these customers, it's somewhat likely that you're going to find some of those problems are things that you could potentially help with. Maybe not in your current innovation and design, maybe in an adjacent area. You might require a pivot. And I'll give an example quickly from something that came across our desk here at NASA. One of our early stage innovators was working on a high temperature battery for Venus missions. Venus is very important to NASA, but there's not a whole lot of missions going to Venus. They're developing this high temperature battery technology. And during some of our technical reviews, we found that even though it's being marketed as a high temperature battery, the technology actually extends the temperature range of the battery both high and low. And it turns out that the moon is cold. And extending the operating range low and referring to this thing as a extreme temperature battery rather than a high temperature battery, actually, and focusing the actual research effort on things in the low temperature regime dramatically increases the number of viable customers that could be interested in funding the technology. Does that change the initial focus of the research effort? Sure, it absolutely does. But being flexible to the pivot from high temperature batteries to extreme temperature batteries is something that allowed the innovator to expand their potential for funding. Another thing that can trip folks up is confusing your funding source and your end user. If you're making cell phones, your consumer is the end user, but the consumer is not going to pay to develop your antenna, and they're not going to pay to put cell phone towers all over the country in order to help with your coverage. You need a funding source for that. You can't only talk to the end user. You have to also find the path, a viable path to get there. And on the government side, this can happen kind of in reverse in some ways, where sometimes, let's say someone wins an SBIR with NASA, some folks will think that that's the end of their customer discovery process. Some people think, okay, NASA likes me. Now I'm on the fast track to having my technology on a mission. But you have to understand that the SBIR program doesn't launch rockets to the moon. They don't create the James Webb Space Telescope, right? If you want your technology to land on a mission, and this is true outside of NASA, but the customer discovery process is just beginning when you're getting the funding and needs to be continuously iterated on so that you can set yourself up for ongoing success after the tech development funding, the early stage tech development funding, is running out. Another thing that I think is important for early stage innovators is being open to partnerships. So it's true that especially in early stages, there's going to be a certain amount of just kicking the tires on your technology and making sure the technology really works, understanding its use cases, and perhaps a little tunnel vision doesn't hurt you too much in the early stages. But at the end of the day, very few capabilities come out of single ideas. Real capabilities are the convergence of many ideas. And quite frankly, the skill sets that are involved in innovating and developing technology are typically not the same skill sets that are required to flight qualify hardware or bring a product to market. And partnerships can be tricky because relationship management and finding partnerships of true mutual interest can be few and far between. But at the end of the day, if you're not willing to perhaps sacrifice and compromise your use cases, your ability to actually go from a component to a system or a component to a capability is going to be dramatically limited. And so I think it's very important that folks be open to partnerships and intelligent about selecting partners and when to select partners. Those are all really important things that enable an innovation to make it to the next step. So now those are some of the things that I think that are kind of in the innovator's hands or the innovator's control. There's also things that would be my responsibility. And when I say my responsibility for that, I'm really referring to people that are responsible for allocating resources to early stage innovations. This could be a private sector venture capital fund. It could be another governmental agency. But really, what do we need to do in order to set up early stage innovators for success? The first thing I think we need to do organizationally is have a clear vision, clearly communicate our needs. It's very difficult for you guys to come up to us and say, hey, I'm trying to help you solve problems. What are your problems? What are your needs? Where are you going? It's going to be very difficult for you all to talk my language and tell me how you satisfy my needs if I'm not clearly communicating my needs, or if my needs are changing over time. That's a scenario where you can do everything right. You address our needs, you develop the tech, and then all of a sudden we say, oh, well, we thought we needed it, but it turns out we don't. All right. So that's something that folks like me need to work on to make sure that there's consistency and reliability and clear communication along the way. As I said before, that's not always perfect. Sometimes things outside of our control prevent us from doing that. But to whatever extent we can, we need to make sure that folks that are on a path and have satisfied our requests have the opportunity to continue to carry these forward. So another one, and probably the one that I spend the most time on, is we need to eliminate organizational disconnects. So organizational disconnects can be in the form of kind of internal organizational disconnects where, for example, if we release a solicitation and we say, we want you to give us heliophysics technologies, and then you guys do everything to develop this technology to support a heliophysics application, and then us as the technology developers go to heliophysics and say, hey, this is a great thing, and then heliophysics tells us, hey, we don't actually need that, or we can't afford it, or something like that, something that prevents the adoption. That's something we need to get better at, is making sure that we were not disconnected when we asked for the topic, when we funded the technology, that folks were on board from the beginning, folks were aware in the beginning. But it's not just about internal organizational disconnects. I think that we need to work vigilantly to connect externally as well. So, for example, when I was running the SBIR Ignite program, we were focusing on technologies that had commercial interest and NASA was responsible for in some way for promoting a commercial market, either commercial space or commercial aeronautics. And so we put a lot of time and effort into trying to make sure that what we were asking for had real commercial viability. We did not want to get to a point where somebody had done everything we asked them to do in Ignite, and then there was no commercial interest. So that requires coordination with other people that focus on funding early stage technologies and making sure that we understand their needs and where potential handoffs are. So those are things that I work on. Those are things that are important to me, and that kind of lays out, what I think that we can do in order to just improve, get more out of our early stage innovations, try to make sure more ideas become capabilities. So if we can clearly communicate our vision and coordinate with all of our other early stage innovation partners, if you all can do your customer discovery, lead with why, understand not just the end state, but the path that's required to get that end state. And if we have a little bit of luck, I think that maybe we can get a few more of these technologies across the finish line. And I love the concept of this conference and the title, the imaginAviation. We need to take some time out and figure out what aviation can be, what it can look like. But after this conference is over and we go back, I think we really, it's not good enough to imagine, right? We have to imagine, but then we actually have to make aviation happen. And that's what we're trying to do here in the Chief Technologist's office, but generally as people supporting early stage innovations. And with that, if we do have any questions, I will open it up. I think we have a little bit of time, and I'll take a quick look. I am not seeing questions from the audience. So with that, I will just say thank you all for watching. And it's my pleasure to introduce our next panel, which is Ideas to Flight. And there's a brief video intro. So thank you all for listening.